Welcome, everybody, to the Truthful Hope Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Vazquez. I have somewhat of a funny story to tell that's related to this episode. I've been on Instagram. I do all the clips, I do all the editing, I read all the comments. So I'm always scrolling through to see like what other apologetic content creators are out there. And I've come across Campfire Apologetics, and I always love the content. I think we released our interview with Greg Kokel on the same day, if I'm not mistaken.
Did we?
I think so. And it's been really ironic. And he's been getting some of the heat in the comments that I've also been getting. So there's a lot of relation there. And eventually I just commented and we got connected. And come to find out, so I moved to Delaware about some years ago. And I asked for his number, and it was the area code was Delaware. And I said, no way is he also from Delaware. And it is the case that both of us live in Delaware, and yet we've been having separate but similar apologetic ministries. So really cool to have you on. That is Mark Hudson. Mark, thanks for jumping on.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate you having me on, dude. This is really cool. Looking forward to it.
It's a small world, and someone might be thinking, why didn't you guys just do it in person? And the answer is because work and family.
Okay. Yeah, right. Now, Delaware is pretty small, but I think you're still about 45 minutes to an hour. So, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, no, one of these days we got to connect. We got to get together.
Absolutely. It's just so crazy. I still can't get over it. I think I could spend the whole episode talking about how much in shock I was. When I found out that you were from Delaware, I went to my wife. I'm like, can you believe this? Like, of all the people on the internet doing apologetics, we run into each other in the same state. So, and Delaware, hilarious. By the way, it's not like New York or California. It's Delaware. So let's be real. Right. How many people actually live here? But nevertheless, I'm really excited for this episode because I mentioned this just minutes ago. Your comment section, we are talking about this offline, gets blown up with a lot of atheists, a lot of non-believers with a lot of objections, sometimes more rude than others. And so do I. I've mentioned this on the episodes in the past that they just come after me. Well, not necessarily me, but the arguments. And specifically on like evolution, definitely on abortion. It's like poking the bear. So what I wanted to do today for our listeners is kind of just do a somewhat of like an FAQ episode where we go over some of the commonly raised objections in our comment section and just have a chance to, talk about it because we're kind of seeing similar things. So if you're all set to go, Mark, we could jump right into the first one.
Yeah, sure. Ready.
Cool. So the first one is slavery and genocide. And I think the background of this objection is something like, how can I believe in a God that doesn't even follow his own moral standard? And that's kind of the objection that you've listed and I've listed as well. So what are your initial thoughts on that objection? And then I'll give some of my 2 cents as well.
Yeah, I think when they say something like, like what you just said, how can he break his own moral standard? Well, I think one, it's a misunderstanding of his moral standards because he can't, logically speaking, God cannot break his own moral standards, right? It seems like it's kind of an attempt on their side to do like an internal critique of your position of Christianity. And if they're going to do that, they have to represent the Christian worldview in the right way. And saying, how can God break his own moral standard is not correctly representing Christianity because the Bible says that God cannot contradict himself. He can't do that which is, illogical. He can't break his own moral standards. So I think what it comes down to really is a misunderstanding of, well, I think it's a misunderstanding of a lot of things. One being, what slavery actually is in the Bible, but also understanding that they are adopting a worldview, or essentially stealing from Christianity to make an argument against Christianity. Because they're assuming an objective moral standard in order to judge the one in which that moral standard comes from, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And yet we'll break down, the slavery and genocide objections separately because they are separate and both have their own misconceptions. But you're absolutely right. They're stealing from Christianity in that they're using the Christian standard of morality to judge God, which you can't do that. And it really begs the question of what moral standard are you even going about to judge God in the first place? Like it's like when atheist Richard Dawkins says that we live in a universe where there's no good, no bad, nothing but pitiless blind indifference.
Mm-hmm.
But then elsewhere he goes on to say that God is immoral. The God of the Bible is immoral. It's like, but you just said there's no good and bad. So what do you mean by immoral? Right? Which one is it exactly? So I think that's a huge problem is, you're going off of a false assumption of like, well, if atheism is true, there is no morality, as you've pointed out on your channel plenty of times, and as you just mentioned here. So that's the first mistake. And then if you are, what you could say, well, it's an inconsistency within the Christian worldview. That's a different objection. It's sound. It makes sense. But then you have to ask yourself, well, is it really an inconsistency? Like, is that true? And as we'll look in a little bit with slavery and genocide, it really is not the case when you understand Christianity for what it truly is. And you mentioned perfectly, God cannot go against his own nature. God cannot lie. God cannot sin. So right off the bat, it's false. but we could dive into that a little further. So I don't know. Before going into genocide, we'll touch on genocide first. I've wrestled with this objection because I see this in the comments, and part of me wants to just ask them, let's say I showed you perfectly that genocide and slavery were not supported for in any way in Scripture. Would you then become a Christian? What would this really be it? Like, is this really the issue with your lack of belief in God? Or is this just somewhat of a smokescreen? Because so many times, I don't know if you've wrestled with this too, but in the comments, I respond to people and I'm going back and forth. And sometimes I write paragraphs on paragraphs, all for them to just go to a different objection or to just say, oh, well, you're stupid or you believe in fairy tales. And it's like, what did we even just do? Like, I thought we were addressing objections. So I don't know. What do you think about, atheists raising this concern in the first place before we dive into the specifics?
Yeah, I think what you said, being a smokescreen, is more or less what it is, because Romans 1, 18 tells us that we suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So I think the unbeliever is looking for every way to be able to suppress the truth so that they don't have to be morally accountable to anything other than themselves. And ultimately, it goes back to the garden. We all want to be our own God. And that was the temptation from the garden. You can be like God. You can know all these things and you don't need God to tell you. And when it comes down to it, I think Vodi Bakum, the way that he puts it, is playing whack-a-mole apologetics. Because you can give them an answer and they'll, if you give them an answer where they can't really respond to, then they'll just kind of move on to the next thing. Okay, well, then this part doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. And, what it comes down to for me, again, is I think that it's really just showing the sin nature in man and how we really just want to suppress that truth. We don't really want answers. We're just looking for ways out. And I think that's what they're doing. And a lot of the times I'll have atheists and they'll bring up Bible verses. And I can't remember who it was that said it. It might have been Cy 10 Bruggencate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or not, but he basically said something like, I don't do Bible studies with atheists. I don't do Bible studies with unbelievers. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, I think that's a good point, because most of the time the unbeliever or the atheist does not have, it's not in their best interest anyway to represent Scripture in an honest way. because if they do that, then I don't think they're going to come to the conclusions that they come to. And so they're not going to really properly exegete the text. They're not really going to properly try to understand the context, the historical context, the culture, any of these things. They're just going to pull text out of the context to make it seem as though it is aligning with their point of view.
Right. And, it's almost, when the atheist says, I can't believe in God who supports, let's say, slavery and genocide. Well, then what are you left with? You're going to believe in secularism and atheism, that it makes the most sense? Like, genocide and slavery makes sense. It's consistent with slavery and genocide, because then you have no human equality. You have nothing grounding two different human beings being equal. If anything, then it's just survival of the fittest, and Hitler was essentially right, if atheism is true, in trying to eliminate the weaker links, quote unquote, depending on what you mean by weak, which is a whole other issue. And so you lose all your grounding in morality if you're going on this assumption. So I think the atheist, I don't think it's been thought out too clearly, this objection, which is why I don't necessarily take it too seriously in the comments. I do take it seriously from like a Christian, a new Christian who, comes to us and says like, oh, well, so the word slavery is in the Bible quite a bit. What do we make of that? And then we could go into, the reason, and like you said, the context and whatnot. But for an atheist to just like Google slavery in the Bible and get a list of verses where the word is used, but not even remotely check the context and what is being said, it's just, I love what you just said. I don't know who said it, but who you just quoted from, but it was, what was it? Don't do Bible studies with atheists. That's phenomenal.
Cy 10 Brugenkate. You can look him up.
Okay.
I'll have to send you a link. He's got he's a presuppositional guy, but he's really, he's quick-witted. He's very smart. But a lot of atheists hate that guy.
Well, that's awesome. I'll definitely look him up later, because that's a good quote. But let's dive a little deeper into this. So genocide, right? We see in scripture where God says, especially in the Old Testament, go and wipe them out, in Exodus or in Joshua, right? We see all these war cries, eliminate them all, have no one standing. I'm just, referencing off memory some places in scripture. What would you make of genocide in the Bible? What would be your first response?
Well, I think this would be one of those instances where they have not tried to understand the text, because you can look in a lot of these places where it says, wipe them out, but don't intermarry with them. Or, a few texts or, maybe a few passages later, paragraphs later, you see that they're still there. They're not actually wiped out. They're still around, or maybe much later on in the narrative, they're still around. So you could see that there has not actually been this complete annihilation of a people group. And I think there's a lot of times in scripture where you see hyperbolic language, much as like how we talk today. If I don't know which teams you're fans of from New York, but let's say the Mets and the Phillies are playing, and I say, the Phillies absolutely annihilated the Mets. Well, I don't mean that they actually went out there with, guns and pitchforks and all kinds of other stuff and literally killed them all on the field and left none of them living. We all know what we mean when we use that kind of language. We mean that, like, they beat them soundly. We beat them really bad. It was like 20-0, something like that. So we all know what we mean. And in the cultural context, in the historical context, the people that would have been reading those scriptures would have understood what they meant, because that was very common language in the ancient Near East, especially in other like war documents from around that same time. They would use similar language in that way, and they didn't actually mean to literally kill the entire group of people. And so, the very fact that the text says, and don't marry them, I think that's kind of pointing to the fact that there probably some are still going to be around. Don't marry into this group of people, because it's not going to be good for you and your people. It's going to lead you away from Yahweh and not toward him. And that's, kind of what they were more or less worried about at that time.
Yeah, no, that's 100% spot on. That's pretty much everything I was going to say too. It's right on the money. And a lot of, what we're talking about is from, at least from my studies, is from Paul Copan, who just has done so much work on this. And sometimes in the comments, I'll say, I'm like, hey, if this is a real objection for you, like if you really struggle with this objection, consider reading this book by Paul Copan. This one I'm holding up here is really good one called Christianity Contested. It was published in 2024. It's edited by Paul, but it has a lot of different topics like genocide, slavery, homosexuality, you name it, just a bunch of objections that Christians face. And he has a whole chapter on genocide, and he goes over everything you just spilled out, essentially. And it's so true. It's just hyperbolic language. And, I raise this because I became a Christian because of my skepticism, because I had questions and I sought the answers. The only reason I sought the answers is because I was genuinely curious, right? So when I raise to a non-believer on TikTok or whatever it is, and I say, here, check out this author who literally does this for a living, like studies these texts for a living.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, it kind of shows me, again, it goes back to the smoke screen. It's like, okay, then were you serious?
You weren't
like,
actually interested in it anyway. You just
right. You weren't really interested. And even if I did like copy and paste what Paul said, that probably wouldn't do anything. So it's just, right in line with what we're talking about. And yeah, to your point, genocide, hyperbolic language. I think your example of the Phillies and Mets was a great illustration, even though I'm a Yankees fan. So Phillies beating them 20-0 is totally fine. I have no problem with that. But it's true. We say it all the time. We say it in sports. We say it, with our friends. And as you mentioned, Paul has actually noted this, that other ancient Near East, I guess, places or people would use similar language in their own writings and their own records. So it's not like anything unique with the Israelites. This is something that was regularly happening in the historical record. So that's just a quick way to address the genocide. Now, the slavery is another interesting part of an objection. What would you say to someone who says, well, I just can't believe in Christianity because it supports slavery? What would you say to that person?
I would ask them if they support the American jail system, and then ask them if America exists. When they say no. But no, I think that the place that I generally go, talking about genocide or slavery, I mean, a lot of the time, the first thing I'm going to ask that person is, what standard are they using to judge and say that slavery or genocide are evil or bad things? Because I would argue that only the Christian worldview can actually make sense of that and actually give you a foundation to call those things evil or bad. But I do think that slavery, the word slavery, I think it's just unfortunate that that's the word that we had to use in translating, from Hebrew to English or Greek to English, or, however these translations come about. And, because there's a lot of times in these languages where English just doesn't do it justice, it doesn't really convey the real true meaning of it. And I think that it's a bit of an anachronism. And what I mean by that is that we understand certain things in our current culture and context, and then we apply those things to the past as if that same thing is what is meant. So, when we hear slavery, we automatically think of chattel slavery in the antebellum South. We think of slavery that is based on race and other factors. And what we see in the Bible is not that at all. We actually see what is considered more to be indentured servitude. Now, that's not to say that like chattel slavery didn't exist at that time, but those aren't the things that we're talking about when we see these texts talking about slavery. When we see all these different laws pertaining to how to treat a slave and things like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about indentured servitude, which oftentimes was an actual contractual agreement that was agreed upon by both parties. There was a lot of time where somebody may have been in debt in some way and they didn't have a way to pay that debt. And so their way to work that debt off or to pay that off was to enter into this contract or this agreement with this quote unquote slave owner. And he would live with them and work for them for 6 to 7 years. And then they would be released and they would be free to go. They still had rights and they were still treated with dignity. And most of those laws that you see are actually pertaining to that, to treat your, again, slave with respect and dignity, and they were still getting food regularly. And, so it's just not the same thing at all as chattel slavery. And I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with an atheist and they're like, they just pull out more text. And I'm like, yeah, it's the same thing. You're just pulling this one single, verse out of context. You're not actually reading what they're talking about there. So yeah, that's just kind of what I think, but
especially when you see, and that's all 100% true, especially when you see like in the surrounding areas where outside of Israel, where chattel slavery was happening and they were abusing and treating these people as property and having full authority over them and being ruthless, like that was happening. But it was Israel, because of the Mosaic law, that had this refugee system, which is what you're talking about selling yourself in order to work off a debt or something. And then you're sold and you're still gaining the benefits of an Israeli household, of an Israelite household, with the Sabbath and all these different things that Israel was blessed with. So you have these benefits as a slave and you're keeping your family together. So you would sell yourself and your family into this Israelite household for a certain amount of time. And then the year of Jubilee, you'd be let go. So it's like, it's not forever, and there's no mention of abuse. There's no permitting of that. I've heard someone say, well, people probably did abuse their slaves. I mean, that could happen. It doesn't mean that God allowed it. It doesn't mean it's prescriptive, right? Just because people break the law doesn't mean that is the law.
Yeah, that's something Frank Turek brings up all the time. There's a difference between prescriptive and descriptive. Like there's tons of things that are described in history, but that doesn't mean that the author is prescribing it. I mean, that would be like you reading a history book on World War II. It's describing all kinds of heinous things that happened, that Hitler did and the Nazi regime did. But that just because it's written down doesn't mean that it's prescribed and it's saying that that's what we ought to do or that's how we should live. And back to your point with, the laws kind of protecting these slaves or indentured servants and things. I mean, some of those laws included, like if one of them ran away and they were discovered, that the person that discovered them was to not return them because obviously they ran away for a reason. They were being treated unfairly, or they were being beaten, or I don't know, not fed, or whatever the case may be that led to them running away. And so one of those laws was, don't return them to where they came from, because clearly that wasn't a good situation. So we could see that same kind of thing, all throughout that kind of Mosaic law dealing with slaves and indentured servants and things like that. So,
right. And it's in the word slave, and you mentioned this, and I think it's a really good point. Like there's really no solid justification for using that word. Because when it's used, right, people just think of the recent, the slave trade and the horrific things that were done to, African Americans in recent history. But like the real word, I think it's abed, is not slavery in the negative sense. It's really servant or worker in the neutral sense. So there's really no reason to use the word slavery, knowing what modern readers will read into the text. I haven't seen a good answer as to why they choose that, but especially in some cases in Exodus, where they'll use the same word abed and they'll do servant one time and then slave another time. Why don't you just use servant both times?
Right. Yeah, so, it is weird how things are
translated.
Sometimes,
it's strange, and they should keep that in mind. But in this book, Christianity Contested, Copen has a chapter on slavery, and I'm going to quote. Looks like he's quoting from the Dictionary of the Old Testament, where this person, Gene Haas, I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, refers to the text that mentions Gentile servants or slaves. And before I get to that, that's another good point is, people think of slavery, they think race-based because of the recent slave trade, but the slavery in Old Testament was not race-based. It was not based on race. It was based on social economic status, because Israelites were slaved as well. So it wasn't like Israelites free, Gentiles not free. It was the Israelites were selling themselves into slavery just as the Gentiles could. So it was not based on race. That's another clear distinction that I think has to be made. But nevertheless, about the Gentile servants or slaves, it says here, he makes clear that they are considered human beings with various safeguards and protections in place that come with living in Israel, which is to be a haven and refuge for runaway foreign slaves. So then he says this is really what I wanted to read. He adds that all Mosaic law passages on servitude assume three basic principles. Principle one, all humans, even slaves and bondslaves, have rights and privileges under the law and before God. Principle 2, it is better to live in the security and provision that servitude in Israel affords than to live in a poverty and destitution, especially when one can come to love his employer or master. And that's Exodus 21, 5-6. And then the third principle is family is important and must be maintained even in the condition of poverty and bond service. So clearly from the Mosaic law, you have these good things coming about from servitude. You shouldn't even have to call it slavery. Servitude, and that's what we're seeing in Scripture. Nothing like what we're used to with recent history. I think I was listening to you mentioned Frank Turek. I was listening to a podcast with him interviewing Paul on this issue, on slavery. You might have listened to it too. It's kind of recent. And he said, he's like, atheists hate when we bring this example up, but it's really true in that the servant in the Old Testament is far less likely to be equivocated with, the recent chattel slavery, but far more likely to be equivalent to like an NBA player, NFL player, MLB player being sold or traded to a different team, and they inherit the benefits of that, whatever it is, with the work and the work that they're doing. So in a sense, like we're all kind of slaves in the Old Testament way. We all work for money. Like I sell my time to make this money, to make a living. I don't want to be doing it. I'm at the mercy of my boss, but here I am. So it's, I think it's just totally taken out of context.
Yeah. Us working for a living is a much closer version of, what the slavery in the Old Testament was versus chattel slavery. So that's a good point.
They won't like that example. Maybe we'll get more comments after we say that.
I'm sure you will.
So that's slavery and genocide. But again, I really think it boils down to like, what is the issue? Like, what is the objection? Like and I might just lead with this next time. Like, if you truly have an objection about slavery, if I could show you that it's addressed, that you have a misconception, will you then believe in Christianity? And if not, then I want to ask, well, what really is hindering your belief in Christianity? If not this, and why are we wasting our time going through this?
Why are we even? It's like, let's get to the foundation of it. Let's get to the core of it, because, like, clearly, this isn't the reason.
Right, exactly. So I hope that was helpful for our listeners. But the second one I think is also very common, at least in my comments, is that the Gospels were not written by eyewitnesses. So, anytime we've had Dr. Ben Shaw on from Liberty University, and, he's written a book somewhere back there, 13 arguments for the historical reliability of the New Testament. And a lot of the arguments are, eyewitness testimony of the resurrection, and the dating of the Gospels were within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. Almost always I get many comments saying that, the Gospels are written centuries later, not by eyewitnesses. It's foolish to think they're written by eyewitnesses. So what do you think about that objection, that the Gospels were not written by eyewitness accounts?
Yeah, I get that. Not so much the eyewitness account thing. I don't get that a ton, but I have seen it probably more frequent or more recently than not. But I do get the the Gospels were written centuries afterward. And I think where that comes from is that people are still taking the Da Vinci Code to be some sort of real historical analysis, of like what really took place. I think there's a lot of people still under the assumption that the Bible was put together at the Council of Nicaea, and Constantine chose the books of the Bible, and because that's kind of all intertwined in the same thing. But yeah, if you look, it's pretty much the whole New Testament was written before the end of the first century. So we don't have centuries in between. But I was watching something with Wes Huff more recently talking about this issue. And, a point that he brings up is that in the ancient world, when it came to really any manuscript that we have, almost everything that we have is formally anonymous. Like most of what we have outside of the Bible or inside of the Bible doesn't really necessarily give you the author, because that's just how things were done in the ancient world. It wasn't really a normal practice to say so-and-so wrote this, or whatever the case may be. But we do have very early testimony from early church fathers who all agree that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were the authors. We don't have anybody really contesting that issue really until more recently. I mean, that actually became more of a contested issue within the higher scholarship of Germany, when we got the Jesus seminars and all those things. That's kind of where that came from. That wasn't really an issue until recently. And I don't really think it's that big of an issue. I don't think that, let's say you don't know who wrote something, therefore what they wrote is untrue. I don't see how the logic really follows, but I also don't think we have any reason to believe that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not the authors. Again, as Wes Huff says, there's plenty of things in the ancient world where there's, formal anonymity. They don't write who it was, but we do have people, places, things, events. We have all kinds of stuff that tie us very closely to people who did walk with Jesus or walked very closely with apostles of Jesus. Like Mark, for example, was Peter's, scribe, or that's what they believe. Peter gave his account and Mark penned it. So I think that's what we see in a lot of those accounts. And then you have Luke, you could tell in Acts, in the beginning of Acts, where he talks about his first book, and that points back to Luke. So, that's the same author. And so I think we can do the same thing with all of the others as well.
Right. Absolutely. And, even if, for sake of argument, we don't know who wrote the Gospels, right? Even if we're doubtful that it was actually Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we still can be historically confident that it was written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, within the first century. That's a given, just with the history that we have alone. Now, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Dr. Shaw points this out in the interview I did with him, is it's clear throughout tradition that that's who it's associated with. And it makes sense when you start doing some cross, textual criticism. It aligns. There's no reason to doubt that. There's no real historical reason other than saying, well, it's not in there, like you mentioned. It's not tagged by John or by Mark or by whatever. Like, that's not listed. That's not really a good argument. That doesn't give me enough reason to say, oh, well, then it couldn't have been Matthew. But it very well could have been. And rather, early church tradition says it was. Now, a lot of times...
it doesn't say his name. I guess it didn't happen.
Right. That's another thing.
I don't
it doesn't follow. Right. It does not follow. And, a lot of times they'll say, well, they weren't written in the first century. That's another objection I get that's closely tied. Now, that's a really hard claim to make, because even Bart Ehrman, who holds to late dating, he's an atheist New Testament scholar, he still holds that the Gospels were written within the first century. I think he puts John at like 90 AD or something like that. It's still within the first century. It's still within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. You could get earlier, in my opinion. But there's still within that lifetime of the eyewitnesses, and that's the important part. And then we have early church fathers, and I'm forgetting exactly who. Is it Irenaeus? Is that how you pronounce his name? Irenaeus, the early church father?
Yeah, that's how I've always said it.
Okay,
Irenaeus or
Irenaeus. Yeah.
or
So I
something.
know he quoted Matthew, I think it was Matthew 5 in his writing. And that dates to like, I'm really just based on memory, like 120, I think, 130 AD. So
Mm-hmm.
he's quoting Matthew. So obviously Matthew must predate when that was written. And then you're already into the first century. And then you have to wonder, well, he's probably quoting a manuscript, and a manuscript is a copy. So the original will predate the copy. So you push that back even further. And by the time you know it, you're within the lifetime clearly of the eyewitnesses. So I think there's really for me, no struggle with this.
Yeah.
And like you, I wonder what the true inspiration of this objection really is.
Yeah, in mentioning the early church fathers, Clement of Rome, he was first century and he quoted the Gospels. So they didn't have an issue with those things, and
they didn't have the internet either. We must say they didn't have Google.
Yeah, and I might ask, the unbeliever, kind of, because it's giving an assumption that their worldview does history any different than our worldview. I might ask them, how do they do history? How do they know what documents are reliable? And how do you even account for anything being reliable in the first place? Like nobody really questions the writings of Alexander the Great. Nobody really questions anything that we have from him. But one, that's one of those things, like we're not really sure who wrote those accounts, and they come, the best manuscripts we have for those are close to 500 years after Alexander the Great lived. So when you compare the New Testament to the rest of history that we do trust, it's much more reliable than really anything else that we have. And that's not even comparing it to all of the other things that you could compare it to, like Homer's Iliad and Plato and, whatever. There's a ton of other things that have very few manuscripts and are written much later after the events themselves. Whereas the New Testament, things are written much closer to the events, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts that if you were to stack them on top of each other, they would pile to over a mile high. So it's not even close of a comparison.
It's the best supported historical ancient source that we have, right? Like without question,
Right.
in comparison to the other, ancient historical sources, it far outweighs them in terms of historical support. And that alone, when I was, skeptical about Christianity and seeking these answers, that was very intriguing to me, because my question was, well, why should I trust this? Just like many non-believers think. And when I saw the historical support for them, no, I did not right away believe in, the miracles and the divine inspiration, but I did believe enough to take it seriously. I did believe enough to not say like, oh, well, Matthew didn't write it, therefore I should just ignore it. Like, well, hold on, just slow down.
Yeah.
Let's see, let's see what's in there, because it is well attested throughout history. So again, I think we're going to start seeing a theme with these comments, in that it's not the real issue. And that was kind of my hope in that communicating and discussing this with you, is that for our listeners, keep that in mind. Like, as you're listening to us unpack this, think about it. Like, if you come across a non-believer in your life, and if you ask them, is this really holding back your belief in Jesus? What do you think they'll say? I think 9 times out of 10, they'll say no. So it's a much deeper issue, which I think as apologists, we should seek to go after those issues. I do think these are serious issues, right? And I think you would agree that they should be addressed. And the smoke screen doesn't mean we ignore it. Sometimes we have to work through the smoke and put it out. But I don't think we stop there. I don't think we count it as a victory to say, oh, I addressed that smoke screen, I'm done, did my job. I think we have to go a little bit deeper with our friends and try and seek out what's really holding them back. So any other comments on the eyewitnesses objection?
No, just what you were just saying. Yeah, I think that's kind of why I cling to more of this foundational way of thinking, or more of the kind of, as you brought up earlier, like transcendental argumentation, because it gets to the root of the worldview. It gets them thinking in terms of worldview, and it shows their preconceived assumptions and notions coming into the conversation, because everybody has a presupposition. Like the Christian has a presupposition, and so does the non-believer, the atheist. And you brought up like the miracle thing. Well, I've had a lot of people say, well, we can trust these other historical documents because they don't talk about miracles. And I'm like, well, first of all, what are you talking about? Because a lot of Roman literature and Greek literature includes weird events. I mean, weird, like miraculous events, but you still trust that they're reliable in their history. So, but the underlying assumption is that miracles can't happen. So there you go. You already have seen their worldview coming through. You've already seen their presupposition coming through, and that's that miracles can't happen. And so that's not really an honest way to go about looking at any historical document, because it claims that this happened, and I don't believe those things happened, therefore it didn't happen. That's just them reasoning in their own little circle. So, that's just a comment based on what you said there last, but yeah, that wasn't really pertaining to.
No, it's a great segue into the next one, which is your transcendental argument. So we haven't talked about this, I don't think, at all on this channel. So it's a good time for you to just, I know this is your one of your lanes that you decided to go down into studying. So maybe explain to our listeners, what is this argument, and what is the pushback that you're seeing in your comments on it?
Yeah, so transcendental argument is a big fancy word, kind of it can sound scary, especially, like I said, I told you that I've been more into like presuppositional side of apologetics, and I think pretty much all sides of apologetics have their strengths. They have good things. Everybody's trying to do the Lord's work.
What is that side of apologetics for our listeners?
Yeah. So I think maybe it turns a lot of people off because there's a lot of these kind of big terms, and they sound kind of scary. But
you sound very smart, I will say that. If
no,
I'm a layperson, I'm like, wow.
I think, yeah. If you start using that language, I'm like, wow. No. So I think it was Scott Oliphant. He wanted to change it from, he didn't like the term presuppositional apologetics. He wanted to call it covenantal apologetics. And I do think that that's probably a better term. And some people just say it's biblical apologetics. It's essentially a top-down approach instead of a bottom-up approach. So it starts with, like I said, everybody has presuppositions. You have assumptions going into conversations. Everybody has a worldview. It's, your worldview is essentially like the lens in which you look through to understand reality, to understand the world. And within that, you're either in Adam or you're in Christ. And that's the covenantal side of it, is, kind of where Scott Oliphant was going with it, I think. But transcendental argument, again, that's just a fancy way of saying what must be true first in order for something else to be true. So, a good example that somebody gave me when we were talking was, what must be true first in order for you and I to be able to have this conversation? Well, we both have to have a working microphone. We both have to have a computer. We both have to have internet. All of these different things go into that. And all of those things must be true before we can meet here on the internet and have this conversation. And that's what it comes down to, is when somebody brings up, I'll go with the moral objection, because we were talking about slavery and genocide, and a lot of the objections that people bring up tend to be more in that ethical side of things. Well, what must be true first in order for genocide or slavery or rape or murder or any of these things to actually be objectively wrong? And this again, this is more foundational, and this brings out their worldview, because sometimes you will get an atheist that says, well, I don't think they are objectively wrong. And then they'll just basically give the reasons as to why it's wrong based on their opinion. But okay, well, now we're talking about preferences. We're not talking about actual objective oughts. If it's your preference to not be enslaved and murdered, well, then what's to say that that's my preference? If I want to enslave you and murder you and I'm going to gain something out of it, well, then it's not really wrong. It's just your opinion that you don't want me to do that to you, but why should I care about that? And so that gets down to kind of the nitty gritty of the worldview, and showing that, okay, you're stealing from Christianity to say that this thing is wrong. And if it's just your opinion that it's wrong, well, now you're being arbitrary, which is to say that you believe something without justification. So to believe something without justification is to be arbitrary. But if it is objectively wrong, well, the unbelieving worldview doesn't have a foundation to hold that together. So you're stealing that from the triune God of Scripture that has basically, you were made in his image, and that's why you know that that thing is objectively wrong. And so that's kind of, there's so much more to it, and there's so much more that, I'm still learning as I go along. I don't know all there is to know about anything, but it's a very deep. It can get deep. It doesn't need to be deep, though. I think anybody can approach that, with apologetics. I don't think you need to have like a degree in philosophy or anything to be able to do that. But studying those things does help, and that's kind of where my journey has been, is trying to study deeper into that thought.
It's deep, but it's important, right? It's foundational, literally foundational. It's almost like I was reading. I remember reading "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," I believe it's in, by Frank Turek.
Yeah.
And I think there is an example where he's talking about objective morality. Maybe it's not from this book. It could not very well.
It might have been stealing from God, maybe.
Might have been stealing from God. But the example is, he gives, it's like you give a friend a book, and your friend says, you said, oh, this is from my favorite author. You say that to your friend, and your friend says, oh, I don't believe in authors. And you're like, what do you mean? I just gave you a book. And your friend's like, well, I could read better than you can. And you're like, okay, you probably can, but like,
great,
an author still wrote it for you to read it. Like that's the foundation, almost like the internet. Like you have to have that in order to be a good person, in order to read better, in order to have internet connection. You have to have these things in place. And it's really important, especially, something that I've been going down quite a bit on our channel is intelligent design versus Darwinian evolution. And Darwinian evolution will presuppose plenty of things, such as consciousness, order, and even the apparency of design. They presuppose these things, and then just say, well, oh, it just happened through this hand-waving method. But like, you have to start somewhere. Origin of life, for example. They can't explain how life originated, but they say it happened. And then they explain everything after that. So it's all these like presuppositions, as you mentioned. You're just presupposing something without arguing for it. Now, eventually we all get back to like a basic belief, right? And I think this is part of maybe their objection is like, well, we could do the same thing to you. And your transcendental argument is we could say, well, how far back do you take it? Ultimately, we take it back to God. Like, objective morality flows from his nature. That's a basic belief. That's foundational, and it's sufficient. Now, the atheists as you mentioned, they don't have that foundation. They have nothing to have that flow out of other than opinion, preference, feelings, society, and even Darwinian evolution, which all of them can only show subjective morality. So it doesn't do the job.
Yeah. And, a lot of atheists will say, well, we can know things. And that's kind of, one of the arguments you'll hear when it comes to these transcendental thing is, in order for you to have knowledge or to know anything at all, the triune God of Scripture must exist.
Mm.
And that's an epistemology, right? So what that means is that epistemology is the study of knowledge, like like how do you know anything at all? That's basically what you're studying when you do that. And so when you hear these big scary words, there's usually pretty simple explanations of what they are. But a lot of atheists will claim that we can know truth, or we can know things based on our sense experience, based on observation and scientific experimentation. Well, there's a lot of assumptions in that. Scientific experimentation would assume that your senses are reliable, and it would also assume induction and uniformity of nature. That nature is uniform and that it acts in a uniform patterns. And induction would be that you're trusting that the future will be like the past. And that's actually a big problem for the atheist. And that's not actually an argument that Christians even came up with. That was a very popular Scottish philosopher, David Hume, came up with the problem of induction. He said that the atheist as atheist, because he was an atheist, and he said, we really don't have a way of knowing that the future will be like the past as atheists. And if they say, well, the future will be like the past because it's always been that way, well, that's circular reasoning. You're assuming what you're trying to prove. But the problem is we're not asking about the past, we're asking about the future. In a world that is random stuff, just chemical explosions, molecules in motion, we have no reason to believe that the future will be like the past. We have no reason to believe that every time I drop a pen, it will fall to the ground and that it won't actually float up into the ceiling. In an atheistic universe, that might actually make sense for that to happen because everything is random. So maybe today gravity won't work the same way as it did yesterday. But in the Christian worldview, we have every reason to believe that the future will be like the past because we have a God who has ordered it in that very precise way. We have a God who has ordered things to act in certain patterns. And that way, that's how we can actually do science at all. So that's all wrapped up into this transcendental type of argumentation. And
and one quick interjection. The pushback that you probably already gotten, is like, oh well, we can expect the future based to be the same way as in the past, based on the laws of nature, laws of physics. But then it's the same problem because, well, you're already basing your foundation on the laws of physics, but what explains the laws of physics in nature? And the laws of nature are descriptive, not prescriptive. They don't do anything. They're not consciously making decisions. They're just describing what happens when left to their natural state. So it doesn't do it. And I know that would be their first initial pushback, would be to posit the laws of nature. It's just not good enough. It's almost like I just had Dr. Dembski on from Discovery Institute, and I go into a lot of irreducible complexity and specified complexity on our channel. So a lot of the comments are about that. And by the way, evolution is a bear that you've probably done this already. When you poke it, the atheists come screaming. And so, I'm talking about it with this guy, and I'm saying, like, in our lives, when we see design, we know it. When you walk on the beach and you see Mary loves James, know that it wasn't the sand crashing on the waves crashing on the sand after billions of years. No, there was probably a Mary who wrote in the sand, a designer. Mary loves James. In the same way, if you look at Mount Rushmore, you know that the edging of the faces in the rock was not caused by natural causes. It was a designer. Now, someone responded to me in the comments and said, well, we could explain by the way, I say that because within ourselves, within life, we see the same type of design with the DNA code, proteins, functionality. So we see that same type of thing. So he was saying we could explain that complexity that we see in life by the laws of physics. But my analogy back to him was, well, positing the laws of physics would be like if I were to explain Mount Rushmore away and say, well, it was just the tools that did it. And you would say, well, the tools don't do anything without a user. In the same way, the laws of nature don't do anything without a designer. They're just descriptive. So to your point, it just pushes the argument back, but it doesn't resolve anything. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but what else were you saying?
No, you're fine. Well, to that point, them appealing to laws of nature. Okay, well, now they're assuming immaterial laws.
Yes, that.
If they're a materialist, as most atheists are, how does a material world produce immaterial laws?
Right.
You don't get immaterial anything from the material world, and they also assume things like logic, like the laws of logic. Well, again, how does only materialism give you immaterial laws of logic? And how does a non-rational process such as something like evolution, random matter acting on time over time, how does a non-rational process produce rationality? It doesn't follow. Again, the atheist, the unbeliever, your thoughts, your logic is all basically just the state that your brain is in right now. Whichever way that your brain is fizzing right now is how you're using logic. Well, that doesn't allow for logic to be universal, and the attributes of logic, immateriality, universality, it doesn't account for those things, and it also doesn't account for you being able to trust your thoughts, because if it's just random chemical explosions, okay, well then I'm no more right than if I shake up a bottle of Pepsi and open it and let it fizz a certain way. There's no real difference there. The bottle of Pepsi's right, I'm right. It's all arbitrary. So, just you saying that just kind of made me go there. But
no, that's a great point. And so that's why I love the argument, because it really gets to the heart of the foundation. And this is kind of playing out better than I expected, because it goes along with what we're dealing with. Like, these are objections raised, but there's a foundation that's still had that might be, there's a foundational issue that we haven't addressed with the slavery and genocide. That's not really keeping me from Christianity. The eyewitness accounts, that's not really keeping me from Christianity, but I'm going to say it anyway. So what is the foundational objection that you have? So that's how I look at this argument. It kind of peels back the layers and says, where are we? Like, where are we really in this whole thing? Now I had, another one that we could discuss, but maybe we can meet another time. We'll discuss that just for time's sake. Because before we close out, I want to give you time to just tell us about your ministry and what you're working on and all these good things where we could find your work. But before we go there, I just want to go on my soapbox a little bit and address something that I told you offline. I can't for the life of me understand why atheists feel the need to leave comments. I really can't. Like, I genuinely cannot. And the reason why I can't is because I used to be one. And when I was one, not too long ago, by the way, when I was one, I didn't care what people believed because I didn't think it was real. I didn't care if you believed in Jesus because I didn't think Jesus was real. I didn't care if you believed in Buddhism because I didn't think it was real. I believed that when we died, we all ended up in the same place. So whatever you believe, so be it. As long as it doesn't harm or bother me, which it shouldn't, because I'm not, especially on social media, I don't know you. I could just unfollow you or block you and go along with my day. But so many times I get atheists commenting, and so do you, even like the rudest comments, like, wow, so stupid. Like, why did you feel compelled? And I'm not even, I know I might come off as like, wow, he's really triggered. I'm not triggered. I'm just confused because I
laugh
don't understand.
A lot.
You laugh.
There's just things that are said about me, like what you just said, like, oh, you're an idiot. You haven't. I'm like, it might be true that I am an idiot, but that doesn't mean that what I said was wrong. Or
you know how many times I've heard truthful hope without the true, like something like that. Like, that's pretty funny. Like, that's what, but like, why comment? I can't understand it, because if you're seeking to change my belief to what are you trying to change it to? And why would it matter to be an atheist? For what? So we could all be nihilistic and we could all just, drop our Christian values and be free from religion, whatever that means, if there even is such thing, and then just all end up in the same place. Because then I know Mother Teresa, if atheism is true, Mother Teresa and Hitler are in the same exact place right now, despite what they did. It doesn't matter. Life doesn't matter if atheism is true. So why, if I'm happy in my faith, I'm being very inclusive right now. If I'm happy in my faith, and if you think that I'm wrong, why should you impose your morality on me to change? If there is no real right or wrong, which on atheism there can't be. So I have so many issues with the comments from atheists because I don't understand the objection. And I do wonder, are they this aggressive with Buddhists? Are they this aggressive with Muslims? Are they this aggressive with maybe Jews now because of the recent politics? But what about all these Eastern religions? Are they just as aggressive, or is it just Christianity? And if so, why? Now, I thought about some pushbacks. They might say, well, because Christianity is harmful, they might say. I would say you're completely wrong, because the whole Western society that we have is a byproduct of Christianity.
Yeah.
The freedoms
Don't go to any
hospitals
or universities then.
Right. The modern science, hospitals, schools, universities, all you name it is a byproduct. Our literacy. The reason we're literate is because people were taught how to read the Bible. Everything we know of today that we enjoy in the West is a byproduct of Christianity. So to say that Christianity is harmful and then maybe cite like a religious war is not going to do it. That doesn't cut it for me. So there has to be another reason. And maybe you just want to be right. Maybe that's your thing. I just want to show them I'm right. Fair enough. That's fine. But I think that's shallow. I'm gonna be honest.
It's a lot of time spent on something you don't believe in to be right.
It's exactly it. So when I was an atheist or agnostic, whatever you want to call it, I would not even have thought of commenting, because I would have thought to myself, what am I trying to do? Why do I care this much? Why am I investing so much time if I don't believe it's true? And if I believe atheism is true, then it certainly doesn't matter if he believes it's true, because like we're all going to end up in a ditch and seeing black for the rest of eternity anyway. So it doesn't matter. So I get emotional thinking about it, but just because I just don't understand it. Yeah, I really can't get it. So maybe in the comments, our fellow atheists can let me know.
Comment. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Comment why you comment.
Why are you like the way you are? Who hurt you?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just something I wanted to get off my chest. I'm glad I was able to do it with you, Mark. So please go ahead. Tell us about Campfire Apologetics. What is it you do? How long you've been doing this? Where do you see the ministry going? And what are you working on now?
Yeah. So Campfire Apologetics, it was something that I've been doing it for a little over a year now. I have wanted to do a podcast, mainly a podcast, and it just in the world that we live in now, I was like, well, I might as well do YouTube and all the other things as well, because that's just how the world is. But it was something I wanted to do for a long time, and for a long time I put it off because I think I just feared being inadequate. I feared, not being able to be good at it, or not have the right resources, or not having like the best camera setup and, computer setup. And I don't know, I just made an excuse for everything. And eventually I just kind of felt a conviction about it. And I was like, I think God's really telling me to do this, and I really need to just listen and be obedient and just do it. And anything good that comes from it is going to be from him. So, the idea is kind of like, so one of my guests said it best, is that, the best conversations are had around the campfire. And that's kind of how I think about it. I have a lot of guests on a lot of the time. Sometimes it's just me, and that's okay. And, it's hard to get people on, consistently. A lot of people are very busy and doing a lot of much bigger things. But I guess my whole purpose for it is just kind of expressing the importance of apologetics for Christians, being that it's not a suggestion of scripture, it's a command. That every Christian needs to be able to give a reason for the hope that is in them. And, you know, sometimes that looks more, you know, it looks more intellectual or educated, and other times it's just having a basic understanding of why you believe what you believe, you know, and it comes in all kinds of different sizes and flavors, and it doesn't have to always be, you know, formal education or anything. I'm not formally educated. I mean, I have a certificate in apologetics through Biola. I mean, that's about all I have. Everything else that I've ever done has just been my own studies, you know, so kind of I guess you would call that an autodidact is somebody who's just studied on their own. I really, really do want to go to seminary, and but it's super expensive, and I'm not sure how to make that work. And I don't know, one of these days I might be able to. But what I actually did do recently was ask ChatGPT to give me a curriculum based on, you know, like an MDiv from like RTS or, you know, like Reformed Theological Seminary or something like that. And it actually breaks it down. It's like, here's seminary or semester 1, 2, 3. You know, if you do this in the right amount of time, it'll probably take you 4 to 5 years. It gives me what books to read based on their curriculum and like different writing assignments and things like that. So I'm like, all right, maybe I'll go that route, because, you know, education doesn't always have to be in a formal sense of having, you know, a school.
Nothing wrong with Chat GPT University.
Yeah. So I might,
not too bad.
I might go that route.
Her tuition's pretty good there too.
Yeah. It's some of the best around right now, I'll tell you. But
no, I don't think our listeners, I'll speak for them, I do not think they'd be able to tell that you have not gone to like a formal seminary. Not that that's required, because you know your stuff. I mean, we just talked for the last hour on some hard topics. Like, these are not easy topics. A lot of people had spent their lives studying, and I think you just did a phenomenal job of addressing them quickly and articulately. So I think you're doing a great job. And I think, you know, whatever route God has you on, it's going to be for a reason. But yeah, you definitely don't, I wouldn't say anyone needs seminary, especially when you got all those books behind you and, you know, Dr. Frank Turek. So I think, and you, and sorry, you have ChatGPT University. I can't look over that.
That's the top one. You can't forget that. No, I really appreciate that. That means the world to me. Where was I? So I think the purpose of my channel is to help people who are not formally educated. That's why I kind of say, like, in the beginning of every episode, that I help give tools to the everyday Christian, you know, to help defend their faith in a hostile culture. And by everyday Christian, that's what I mean. You know, guys who they just work for a living, they blue collar, white collar, whatever it is, and they don't have the time to do seminary. They don't have the time to sit down and watch a ton of lectures or read a ton of books or do writing assignments and things like that. But they do have a desire for apologetics, and they do have a desire to be able to have tough conversations with unbelievers and you know, go into evangelism and, you know, preach the gospel. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And I guess, you know, I don't really know what the future holds for it. I hope that God grows the channel and does cool things with it. But I think ultimately what I really, really would like to start doing is maybe start contacting some like local churches and stuff and going in and maybe doing like a little, like an apologetics kind of weekend, you know, apologetics course, maybe just giving little teaching seminar type things and doing Q&As and things like that. I think that would be a lot of fun. I do really like talking with people and teaching and trying to equip people. So I think that's maybe the route that I'll try to go. But yeah, I don't know if I answered everything that you.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So where can our listeners get your channel? What's your channel name?
Yeah, so it's Campfire Apologetics, and you can find that on YouTube. It's a podcast on Spotify and Apple. I think I'm only on those two because when I was trying to figure out how to get it on a bunch of other platforms, I was just running into issues. I was like, I don't know how to do this. So I'm just going to go with the two big ones that most people are going to listen on. So yeah, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, that's where you'll find the long form, episodes. You'll get the whole episodes there. But I'm also on Facebook, Mark Hudson. You can find me there. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, or Twitter X, whatever it's called. TikTok. I'm on all of those right now. Just search Campfire Apologetics. I have been thinking about maybe dwindling it down to maybe just like YouTube and the podcasts, just focusing on those areas, because it is hard to keep up with all of them. But as of right now, I'm kind of everywhere. So, just search Campfire Apologetics. And there's a cool little campfire scene that you'll see that I had ChatGPT 2 up for me, because I don't know how to use computers very well, and I can't come up with cool things on my own. So, but yeah, yes,
That's
seek
awesome.
me out there.
Well, to our listeners, please go check him out. It's funny. We are very similar in a lot of ways. Our ministries are both fairly new. I also was hesitant to start a podcast because of that, because of fears of not being good enough, not knowing enough, whatever it may be. So very interesting there. And we also both live in Delaware. So I think this is very much a God thing, right? If you're not a New York Giants fan, I'll make sure you are one by as long as I know you, because that's my goal.
Go Birds!
Oh no! See, there you go. There goes everything. I'm tempted to say, just don't even go to his channel, guys.
Everything he just said was just overridden by that.
Oh gosh, no, just kidding. No, just kidding. I'm really grateful for this friendship, Mark. I think it's going to be great, and who knows, maybe something will come up where we could collaborate on some kind of event like that, like you were speaking about. But at least for the time being, to our listeners, check him out, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Check out his channel, and give him a shout out. Make sure to comment too, because commenting helps the algorithm. It helps spread the word, engagement. That's what the algorithm looks for, especially on YouTube. So make sure to leave a comment on some of his episodes. But well, Mark, we're at hour 12 now, so we're over time. But I really just want to thank you for jumping on, and hopefully we could have more of this. I want to have you back on. We could do some more FAQs that we see in our comments. I think it'll be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you again. Thank you so much for having me on. This is actually the first time I've been on somebody else's show, so it's cool for me to do that. And I'll have to reach out. We'll have to get you on Campfire as well, and we'll come up with a topic and get some people commenting on there, I'm sure, as well. So it'll be fun.
Any place I could generate comments and ask them why they comment, and that I am all game.
Why do you comment? Yeah.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you again for jumping on. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. God bless.
Thank you so much, man.